It was October 16th, 1946, inside the Nuremberg prison gymnasium. The air was heavy, the walls echoing with the weight of what was about to happen. The gallows had been freshly built. The wood still smelled new, raw, unfinished. When they opened his cell, Hans Frank, once Hitler's personal lawyer and the self-proclaimed King of Poland, was told there were 13 steps to the noose that waited for him. He had once signed orders that starved entire cities. He ruled over occupied Poland with an iron fist, living in stolen palaces, surrounded by looted art, including one of Leonardo da Vinci's masterpieces. The man who once dined like royalty could barely finish his last meal. His trembling hands betrayed the fear he had once inflicted on millions. Just after midnight, as guards led him toward the scaffold, an American soldier whispered under his breath, "This one's for Poland." The words cut through the silence like a blade. Frank's face was pale, drained of the arrogance that once defined him. This was no longer the powerful Nazi jurist who sat beside Hitler, preaching about law and order. This was a man stripped bare before justice. But what followed was not swift. When the trapdoor opened, death did not come quickly. The rope failed to break his neck cleanly. Witnesses would later say he writhed and gasped for nearly 5 long minutes, his body jerking violently. A slow, suffocating end that mirrored the suffering he unleashed across Europe. They had called him the Butcher of Poland. That night, justice came for him, brutal, deliberate, and agonizingly real. This is the story of Hans Frank, the Nazi who once wielded law as a weapon, who spoke of morality while drowning in blood, and who met an end as horrifying as the crimes he once justified. Who was he anyway? On May 23, 1900, in Karlsruhe, Germany, Hans Michael Frank was born into a wealthy family. His father was a well-known lawyer, and his mother's family was rich from banking. But when Hans was 10, his mother left the family for another man, and something inside the young boy changed. In 1917, a 17-year-old Frank joined the German army in World War I, but he never actually fought. After the war, Germany lost, and a young Frank wanted violence, so he joined a group called the Freikorps. These were not good people. They were violent groups that hunted down their political enemies in the streets. He crushed a political group called the Bavarian Soviet Republic without mercy. This gave him a taste for political violence that he would never lose. In 1919, Frank joined the German Workers' Party, which later became Adolf Hitler's Nazi Party. He was not just a member, he was deeply involved. When Hitler tried and failed to take over the government in 1923, Frank was there as a stormtrooper. And when it failed, Frank ran away to Italy, leaving the others to get in trouble. When he returned to Germany in 1924, he started over. He became a lawyer who defended the new Nazi Party in more than 2,400 cases. He became Hitler's personal lawyer, his smart voice. He was the lawyer who kept Hitler out of jail. One of his old teachers saw the darkness in him and begged, "Stay away from these people. Political groups that start in criminal courts will end in criminal courts." Frank, wanting power and fame, did not listen. That warning would later turn out to be true. On April 2, 1925, Frank married Brigitte Herbst, a secretary who was in a hurry to get married. Their marriage had no love. It was just a deal. Brigitte was a strong person who controlled him completely. They had 5 children, but she did not want them and used them to control her husband. It was a very unhappy family, even before the real horror started. Hitler was loyal to those who were loyal to him. He gave Frank powerful jobs as the Nazis took control. Bavarian Minister of Justice in 1933, a minister in the government in 1934, and head of the Nazi Party's legal office. Frank didn't just follow the laws, he made them. He started the Academy for German Law and explained the Nazi idea of law very clearly. The judge's job is to protect the racial community and get rid of dangerous people. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was preparing for mass murder. Then came September 1st, 1939. Germany invaded Poland, starting World War II. 3 weeks later, Hitler rewarded Frank for being so loyal. He made him Governor General of occupied Poland. This job changed him from a man who wrote evil laws to one of the biggest mass murderers in history. When Frank got the job, he told his wife, "You will become the Queen of Poland." He moved into a castle in Krakow and hung Leonardo da Vinci's famous painting Asterisk Lady with an ermine asterisk in his office while he planned the killings. Frank said what he planned to do very clearly. Poland will be treated like a colony. The Poles will become slaves of the German Empire. And he meant it. What happened next was organized mass murder. This earned Frank the name the Butcher of Poland. Under Frank's rule, his part of Poland had over 12 million people, including 1.5 million Jews. Frank set up a system of police courts that ordered public executions of 20 to 200 Poles at a time. He believed in shooting first and not asking questions. In just a few months, he made new rules that got rid of courts, took people's property, and made them work as slaves. He told his officials, "I ask nothing of the Jews except that they simply disappear." And they did disappear. First into poor, crowded neighborhoods called ghettos, then into mass graves, and then into gas chambers. He signed every paper that made these actions legal. Frank later bragged, "In Prague, they put up big red posters after they executed 7 Czechs. If I had to put up a poster for every 7 Poles shot, there wouldn't be enough paper in all of Poland's forests." Think about that. He was so proud, counting lives as if they were nothing. The numbers are shocking. Frank's rule led to the murder of at least 3 million Jews and thousands of Polish citizens. He created the Warsaw Ghetto, forcing over 400,000 Jews into a tiny 1.3 square mile area. There were about 7 people to a room with no clean water or toilets. Imagine the smell, the sickness, and the sadness. The amount of food people were given shows that Frank planned to kill them. Jews received only 184 calories a day, while Germans got 2,613. A German order said, "The food for the Jewish area must be less than what is needed to stay alive, no matter what happens." What happened? Between 1940 and 1942, 83,000 Jews starved to death in the Warsaw Ghetto alone. Think about that. 83,000 people died, not from bullets, but from being starved on purpose. In 1941, he told an audience in Berlin, "We can't shoot or poison 3.5 million Jews, but we can find ways to get rid of them." He told his senior officials, "What should we do with the Jews? Berlin told us to kill them yourselves. Gentlemen, you must get rid of all feelings of pity. We must kill the Jews wherever we find them." They used death camps like Treblinka, Belzec, Sobibor, and Auschwitz to murder over 3 million people. By the end of the war, 90% of Polish Jews were murdered. He never fired a gun himself, but he was responsible for all the killing. Every morning, his helper laid out his clean uniform. Every evening, he wrote down the day's crimes in his diary. 40 handwritten books. He thought they would make him look important. Instead, they would get him hanged. While millions starved and died, Frank lived like a king. He had drivers, servants, and cooks in several palaces. The palaces were filled with treasures stolen from murdered Jews and Poles. He signed the orders, lived in luxury, and wrote it all down. His pride was unbelievable. May 1945. The war was over. Germany was in ruins. There was no more Queen of Poland or stolen art. American soldiers found Hans Frank hiding in a barn in Bavaria. He was wearing normal clothes and holding a suitcase full of stolen property. He was caught like a common thief with no more power, but he still thought he was important. At the prison camp, he tried to be charming. "I am a lawyer, gentlemen. I kept things in order." He expected to be respected, but the soldiers had seen terrible things and just showed each other pictures of starving children from the areas he controlled. Frank's smile finally disappeared. He was moved to Nuremberg, to cell number 30. Then came the final blow, not from an enemy, but from his own pride. His 40 handwritten diaries were brought in. It was a huge pile of evidence that he had created himself. The prosecutor, Robert Jackson, who knew this was a historic moment, opened one of the books and read Frank's own words. "1,000 years will pass, and the guilt of Germany will not be erased." Frank blinked. It seemed even he was surprised he had written something so true. He had written down his own downfall. The trial began on November 20th, 1945. During the trial, Frank's defense changed all the time. Sometimes he acted sorry, and other times he blamed everyone else. He admitted to 1,000-year guilt, trying to seem like a man who regretted his actions. But then, he would say he knew nothing about the death camps. A lawyer, a man who signed every order, saying he didn't know about the mass murder happening under his rule. It was hard to believe. When the court heard about the Warsaw Ghetto, where people were given only 184 calories a day, he claimed he didn't know about medicine. One of the judges, Justice Biddle, said sharply, "You had a law degree, Governor, not a medical degree." The people in the courtroom laughed. Frank's face turned pale as his lies fell apart. During breaks, he seemed desperate. He asked the prison priest for a Bible. By the fall, he was going to Catholic church services in the prison, holding prayer beads. He even wrote to his wife, Brigitte, saying, "I am a new man." History books say his change of heart was just for show. The other prisoners who knew the real Frank thought it was sad. Either way, the judges were not convinced. A change of heart in a prison cell does not undo millions of deaths. On October 1st, 1946, at 4 p.m., the courtroom was completely silent. The head judge, Lord Lawrence, announced the decision. Guilty on counts 3 and 4, death by hanging. Frank's legs gave out, and 2 US guards had to hold him up to keep him from falling. The King of Poland was now just a man sentenced to die. Back in his cell, the truth hit him. He didn't eat his dinner. The simple food he could barely eat before now felt like an insult. Instead, he asked for a priest. He knelt for 3 hours, praying. In a nearby cell, another high-ranking Nazi, Hermann Goering, was joking about appealing the sentence, still thinking he could escape death. Frank did not laugh. He knew his own diary left him no hope. It was over. A week later, the judges denied any requests for mercy. There would be no second chance, no pardon. The execution date was set. He had 8 days to make peace with God while the hangman prepared the rope. The clock was ticking, and this time, Frank couldn't sign an order to stop it. October 15th, 6 p.m., the last meal. It was 1 boiled potato with no salt. It was a sad, small meal compared to the large feasts he used to have in his castle. He told the guard in a quiet voice, "I deserve less." Maybe in these last hours, he felt some real regret, or maybe it was just the fear of his own death. He wrote 2 letters. One was to his oldest son, a final, desperate try to connect. The other was to the nation of Poland, but he never finished it. What could he say to a country he had robbed and murdered? He went to a midnight church service in the chapel. Father Sixtus O'Connor, the priest who had been with him, asked a final, direct question. "Any last words for the Jews?" Frank whispered, "Tell them I am sorry. It will sound hollow." He knew it. We know it. At 1 a.m., a barber shaved the back of his neck. The army wanted the noose to have a clean surface. It was a cold, grim process. Frank looked in the mirror, maybe seeing the faces of the millions he had killed. He said something deep, even if it was about himself. "I once thought power was eternal. Tonight, rope is eternal." He couldn't sleep. He walked back and forth in his cell, counting his prayer beads. The butcher of Poland was now just a terrified, sleepless man counting down the minutes. Just after midnight, the steel door opened with a loud clang. "Time's up, Governor." He straightened his prison shirt, a last small act of pride, and walked into the hall. American soldiers walked on either side of him, their boots making loud noises in the quiet morning. They passed a window with frost on the glass. Outside, a light snow was falling on the ruined city of Nuremberg. The city he once promised would be a German paradise. It was a sad, ironic view for a man who had created hell on earth. The gym doors opened. 10 military witnesses stood silently, watching the end of this dark story. The gallows stood there, a simple wooden structure built for justice. Army rules said there should be 13 steps, but this one only had 8. The army didn't build it for show. They built it to carry out a sentence. They built it for consequences. Master Sergeant John C. Woods, the hangman, wasn't just following orders. He had changed the gallows himself. The US Army rules said the drop should be 7 feet long. This was usually enough to break a person's neck quickly, but Woods had made the drop much shorter, only 4 feet and 10 inches. He had a cold, practical reason for this. He believed a slower death by strangling was more certain than a quick neck break. Newspapers later called this change the engineered cruelty. But Woods said he wasn't trying to be cruel. He claimed he just wanted to avoid the horrible sight of a head being torn off, which he had seen happen before. The rope was a strong 1-inch rope. It had been boiled so it wouldn't stretch. The noose was tied with 13 coils, a grim tradition. Under the trapdoor, there was a shallow concrete pit placed there to catch any body fluids. A microphone was set up nearby to record the official time of death for the radio. Every part of the gallows had been oiled and tested to be silent. But even with all this careful planning, when Woods pulled the lever, the whole structure shook violently. It happened right on time. At exactly 1:14 a.m., the chaplain started to read a prayer for mercy. With the hood on, Frank tried to say something, but the thick cloth blocked the sound. Woods calmly and expertly slipped the rough noose over the hood. He carefully placed the knot behind Frank's left ear. This was supposed to break the neck instantly. Then, with a sudden awful drop, the trap door swung open. Frank fell. The rope pulled tight with a loud snap, but the sound of a breaking neck never came. Instead, Frank's body started to spin. His legs kicked wildly in the air, a horrible, uncontrolled dance. An Associated Press reporter, Joseph Kingsbury Smith, saw the terrible sight and quickly sent a message to New York. The neck failed to break. The man dangles, alive, strangling. A medical officer, Lieutenant John B. Van Houten, watched and timed the body's movements. He saw Frank's fists clench for 14 seconds, then his legs kicked wildly for 31 seconds. Then, his body went limp, but it wasn't over. A faint pulse could still be felt. The shorter drop had failed. It didn't cause a clean break, but a long, painful strangulation. The rules required a doctor to check for a pulse after exactly 3 minutes. At 1:18 a.m., Lieutenant Van Houten checked Frank's neck and found something shocking: a heartbeat. It was still beating fast, at 92 beats per minute. This was a sign that Frank was still alive, slowly choking. The execution was a horrible failure. Woods realized his plan had gone wrong and jumped into action. He climbed a ladder next to the hanging body, grabbed the rope and pulled down hard with all his weight, twice. A faint, sick cracking sound was heard. It might have been bone or just the gallows creaking. But still, the heart kept beating. At 1:21 a.m., Frank's body was still moving. The prison doctor, fed up, signaled for them to do a second drop to end the suffering. But Woods refused. Instead, he tried something else. He put a canvas strap under Frank's arms and pulled up, squeezing the air out of his lungs. 9 terrible minutes after the fall, the doctor checked for a heartbeat again. This time, there was only silence. The doctor announced he was dead at 1:23 a.m. The entire process, from the trapdoor opening to the official time of death, took 22 minutes. Hans Frank's execution was the longest and most painful of all the Nuremberg hangings. The reporters who were there saw a scene they would never forget. Margaret Burke White, a famous photographer for Life magazine, wrote down the horrible details. She described the bottom of Frank's feet turning a sickly grey colour, his legs becoming spotty and purple, and the hood getting darker where his tongue pushed against his teeth as he struggled. A Reuters reporter, Anne Stringer, wrote about another detail: a smell of evacuated bowels mixing with pine sawdust. The army had put sawdust on the floor to absorb any mess, but it had turned into a red slush. The horror was too much for some. One young reporter fainted and crashed against a railing. The microphone that was set up for the radio recorded every sound. It picked up the gasp from the witnesses, the bang of the trap door, and even the sound of Woods grunting as he pulled on the rope. The next day, CBS radio played the recording, but they turned the volume way down. Listeners only heard a dull thud from the trap door, followed by a long, cold hissing sound. That was the sound of the air leaving Frank's lungs. It was a cleaned-up version, but it still gave a hint of the brutal reality. Once Frank was declared dead, the grim process of dealing with the body began. Guards cut the rope and laid the body on a stretcher. It was wrapped in a rough wool blanket with the label "Prisoner number 14,523 inches" sewn on it. By 2:05 a.m., the body was in the prison morgue. A tag was put on its toe and dental records were attached. A plaster cast, called a death mask, was made of his face. It showed that his nose was flattened and his jaw was stuck open in a silent scream. A few hours later, at dawn, Frank's body and the 9 others were put on a covered truck. The truck went to a crematorium in Munich, where the ovens were already heated to a burning 1,100 degrees Celsius. In a final act to erase them completely, their ashes were scattered in the Isar River. The location was kept secret so that no one could ever build a memorial for them. Later, a reporter asked Woods, the hangman, if he slept well after the executions. Woods acted cool and said, "Sure, I always sleep after a good day's work." But the reporter noticed that when Woods lit a cigarette, his hands were shaking.